questions to answer. Just a disclosure, this webinar will be recorded and be made available for all the participants in this webinar. So welcome to the Oregon Department of Education's Child Nutrition Program Community Eligibility Provision Training 101. My name is John Obali, and I am the main coordinator for guiding and helping sponsors through the process of getting qualified for the community eligibility provision. I am presenting today with Kunyin Kwan and Michelle Fleener, and they'll be breaking up the majority of the webinar, and then I'll be at the end. I'll also be monitoring questions during the webinar and answering those questions at the end. Before we get into the topic of the day, let's first start with some housekeeping notes. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. If you do have questions, please feel free to add it in the questions or chat area at any time during the presentation. We will answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Let's start with a reminder of the Oregon Department of Education's commitment to equity. The Oregon Department of Education works in partnership with school districts, education service districts, and community partners to foster equity and excellence for every learner. Together, we serve over 560,000 K-12 students and support 75,000 school employees, including nutrition service staff. We believe every student should have access to a high-quality, well-rounded learning experience, and we work to ensure every student in Oregon graduates with a plan for their future. The last slide talked about who we serve. This one is a reminder of ODE's commitment to equity and informs how we serve. Education equity is equitable implementation of policy, practices, procedures, and legislation that translates into resource allocation, education, rigor, and opportunities for historically and currently marginalized youth, students, and families, including civil rights protected classes. This means the restructuring and dismantling of systems and institutions that create the dichotomy of beneficiaries and the oppressed and marginalized. Now let's get into the CEP part of the presentation, and Kunyin will take over at this point.
Thanks, John. We'll start with a session overview of CEP. In this presentation, we will cover multiple areas regarding the CEP, the Community Eligibility Provision. We will review how to qualify the CEP, explain the identified student percentage, provide an example of strategically grouped schools to maximize benefits, and review the timeline for implementation for this upcoming school year. Then we will review the Oregon Community Eligibility Provision Incentive Reimbursement Program and how this program makes participation in the CEP financially viable for most schools that qualify. We will also review the CEP election process and how to successfully collect and submit required data. And finally, we will take a brief look at CEP operations. As we prepare for the school year 2022-23, it is important to acknowledge that this year will be a transition year back to normal school meal operations. Schools in Oregon have been operating under the USDA waivers, over 100 waivers in total, since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. This allowed program sponsors to operate non-pricing summer meal programs during the traditional school year. In school year 2021-22, virtually all Oregon school nutrition program sponsors chose to participate in the non-pricing seamless summer option. All current school meal program waivers issued by the USDA are scheduled to expire on June 30th, 2022. Schools, families, and communities over the past 2 years have grown accustomed to receiving school meals at no charge without the burden of meal applications. The Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP, is one option that can create continuity in meal access for students as waivers come to an end. Now is a great time for schools and school districts to evaluate or re-evaluate CEP to see if it is a good fit for their program. Before we get into the details, it's helpful to understand our audience today and where you are in the process of exploring the CEP. We'll launch our first poll of questions. Please select one response. We'll hopefully see.
Okay, most have responded.
Do you have the results, Laura? Thank you. It looks like the majority of you are expanding CEP and some of you are considering CEP for the first time. I do see in the comments that some of the answers do not fit everybody's responses, but we'll go forward from here. The CEP, or Community Eligibility Provision, is a meal service option that allows schools and school districts to serve breakfast and lunch at no cost to all enrolled students without the burden of certifying students for meal benefits. Schools that adopt the CEP are reimbursed using a formula based on the percentage of students who are normally certified for free school meals without an application. Students who participate in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, or who are designated as foster, migrant, or McKinney-Vento are examples of eligible students. Benefits of the CEP includes the elimination of household free and reduced meal applications. The election of CEP is approved for a 4-year cycle. Both of these factors significantly reduce administrative burden. CEP also increases student participation, reduces stigma, and improves program efficiency. The CEP Planning and Implementation Guide link and other resources identified in this webinar will be provided separately later. To be eligible for the CEP, each individual school must participate in both the NSLP, the National School Lunch Program, and the SBP, the School Breakfast Program. Enrollment data as of April 1st of the school year prior to starting the CEP must be submitted. To qualify for the CEP, a district, group of schools, or an individual school must have at least 40% or more identified students. Identified students are those students who are directly certified using Oregon's secure online direct certification system, identifying SNAP, TANF, FDPIR, and foster students. Identified students could also be those who participate in Head Start, who qualify in the Oregon pre-kindergarten program, or are other source categorically eligible students, such as homeless, migrant, foster, runaway, or in special situations where meal applications are completed by local school officials. All children in Head Start and qualifying children in Oregon pre-kindergarten are considered identified eligible students for the CEP. Please note that the non-applicant students approved by local education officials are applications submitted on behalf of a child by a school official, such as a principal, based on available information. Now we'll review the identified student percentage, the ISP calculation. Identified eligible students, the number on the top, the numerator, is the sum of the students in the categories listed to the left of the graphic. The total students, the denominator on the bottom, are all enrolled students, including pre-K children with access to at least one meal. The ratio of the identified eligible students to the total number of students is the ISP. The identified student percentage is extended to the school population through a multiplier of 1.6 to determine the federal free claiming rate. The multiplier was established by the USDA, and it represents for every 10 children identified as eligible, there are 6 more eligible based on income application alone. This is the reason income applications are not considered in qualifying for the CEP. Now we will discuss how to strategically group your schools. Schools with low ISPs can be combined with schools with higher ISPs to reach the 40% threshold as a group. In this graphic, a district has 10 sites. The district does not qualify for CEP district-wide, but they can group their sites to qualify for CEP as a group and/or as a single site. In the CEP group on the left, Site 1 with an ISP of 54.24% and Site 4 with an ISP of 43.76% have ISPs high enough to bring Sites 2 and 3 into a group that qualifies for CEP with an ISP of 40.28%, meeting the 40% threshold. For this example, the number of students at sites 1 through 4 are equal. ISPs are not averaged when grouping sites. The numerator and denominator are summed up for the entire group of sites before making the calculation. Sponsors who elect CEP agree to participate in 4-year cycles. During each year of the 4-year cycle, sponsors can decide to continue with the original ISP determined in year 1 of the cycle or go through the CEP election process again. Typical reasons to go through that process again would be to obtain a higher ISP, to change the sites within a group, or because there are changes to the attendance boundary. We will now discuss the Oregon Community Eligibility Provision Incentive Reimbursement Program, or the CEPI reimbursement program, which can make CEP financially viable for most sponsors. The Oregon Community Eligibility Provision Incentive, or CEPI reimbursement program, is an Oregon-funded school meal provision under the Student Success Act. This program provides a supplemental reimbursement in addition to the federal meal reimbursement. This state reimbursement covers the difference between the federal free and the federal paid reimbursement rate up to the state's determined annual free reimbursement goal rate of 90%. The purpose of the program is to encourage participation in the federal CEP program and to maximize the number of schools operating under the provision by making the provision financially viable for more eligible schools and districts. Public schools or school districts operating the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program under the CEP are eligible to participate. The top bar in this table on the left represents a school, group, or district that just qualifies for CEP with a 40% ISP. Applying the 1.6 multiplier results in a 64% free claiming percentage, with the remaining 36% reimbursed at the federal paid rate. However, the reimbursement from the federal provision alone may not be financially viable for some school districts. With CEPI, the state will supplement the federal free reimbursements by increasing the free claiming rate up to 90%, and the remaining 10% will be reimbursed at the federal paid rate. In short, Oregon CEPI will effectively bump up the free claiming rate to 90% for all sponsors eligible to participate in the CEP and who opt in to the CEPI program. The two tables are based on typical ISPs in the range of 40 and 50% and are an example of how the CEPI reimbursement in blue changes as the ISP increases. The benefit of CEPI ends when the ISP reaches 56.25%, which calculates to the 90% claiming percentage limit for CEPI. It is likely no supplemental state reimbursements would be available at this ISP. However, at this point, it is likely a viable financial decision to participate in the CEP. Please note that the ideal ISP would be 62.5% or above, which calculates to a 100% free claiming rate. At our next slide, Michelle will continue the presentation with how the CEP and CEPI participation are recorded in CNP Web.
Thanks, Kunyan, and thank you to everyone joining us today for this presentation. As Kunyan stated, I'm going to move into how you enter your claim in CNP Web. So on this slide is how is CEP and CEPI participation recorded. In CNP Web, on the site information sheets, in the NSLP and SBP sections, selecting CEP incentive from the dropdown will indicate participation in the Oregon CEP Incentive Reimbursement Program, also known as CEPI. Sites which already qualify for 90% free claiming or higher without the CEPI will select the standard community eligibility provision. Site level CEP participation type is selected in the NSLP section only. Once the sponsor's CEP election is approved by ODE, the sponsor is required to have a written grant agreement in place with the Oregon Department of Administrative Services before CEPI funds can be received. And this slide shows the federal CEP claiming percentage before the Oregon CEPI is applied. If a site is participating in CEP, the claiming percentages will be displayed at the bottom right of the site claim sheet. These claiming percentages are approved during the CEP election process. Now we'll talk about CEPI is applied. To calculate the number of Oregon paid meals for CEP schools, the Oregon CEP incentive rate must first be calculated. As shown, the difference between CEPI target of 90%, which is the maximum rate CEPI will be supplement, minus the CEP federal free rate of 66.43 for the school is 23.57. In this example, the Oregon CEPI meals would be the total reimbursable student meals 1,000 multiplied by the Oregon CEPI incentive rate of 23.57, resulting in 236 Oregon CEPI meals. Now we're going to move into Community Eligibility Provision Election Process Overview. And before we get into the details of the CEP election process, it's important to have an understanding of CEP proxy data and how to interpret it. ODE is federally mandated to publish lists of eligible and near eligible districts by May 1st of every year. ODE has created lists that have proxy identified eligible student percentages for all Oregon districts and schools. You may check the proxy data for your school district or school on the ODE Special Provisions webpage. And we'll be providing a link at the end of the webinar for that webpage. This proxy data is derived from using the ADM, Average Daily Membership, and it's from the fall 2021 reports as enrollment and identifying eligible students from DHS Direct Certification Lists from July 1st to April 4th. Actual ISP for districts and sites is frequently higher than the proxy data due to changes in enrollment, extensions of identified eligible to other students in the same household, and additional students that are identified eligible at the local level, such as migrant students, homeless runaway students, and students enrolled in Head Start. For this reason, sponsors that have sites that are near eligible using proxy data are encouraged to submit data collections to ODE. The process has been streamlined in the past 2 years, making it less burdensome for schools or school districts. For a small school district or site, the difference between qualifying and not qualifying for CEP can be one additional student that is identified eligible. So let's take a moment and do one other poll. Laura, if you want to launch that for us. So our question is, does your district have a large population of, and it's a multiple choice, migrant students, homeless runaway students, Head Start students, or all of the above? And we'll give everyone a minute to submit their answer. All right, Laura, we could go ahead and close that poll and let's reveal the results. Great, for this question, we have 30% marked for migrant students, 52% for homeless runaway students, 17% for Head Start students, and 26% for all of the above. Great, thank you for your participation in that poll. And now we'll move on to CEP election process. To use community eligibility provision, the identified student percentage must be approved by Oregon Department of Education. The election workbook and supporting primary documentation are used to develop the ISP for each school and their approval. This slide shows the steps to submitting the election workbook. So step 1, gather the entire district's membership enrollment. List representative of April 1st enrollment. The student membership enrollment list must be obtained directly from the student information system. This list cannot be obtained from a nutrition service system. For the purpose of calculating the identified student percentage, ISP, enrolled student means students who are enrolled in and attending schools with access at least one meal service. So that would be either school breakfast program or the National School Lunch Program daily. Moving on to step 2, is to gather other source categorically eligible documentation, such as McKinney-Vento students, migrant students, Head Start, Early Head Start student lists. This must be primary source data in the form of a signed statement or statements from the appropriate liaisons, certifying any students listed as other source categorically eligible. And then step 3, you're going to submit the membership list on the required template. So it's very important that you use the required template, and you're going to submit the supporting primary source data to ODE. In the 4th step, ODE will conduct matching. Matching is the process of comparing the district's enrollment list to a list of students identified as other source categorically eligible using SNAP and foster records from the Oregon Department of Human Service. And then step 5, ODE CMP will use the data provided in step 3 to conduct the initial matching. The results will be captured in an Excel workbook for the school and/or districts to review. ODE will return match results along with the match results file and customized instructions explaining how to identify and return supporting documentation for specific student categories. And step 6 is to complete the CEP election workbook and sign the CEP agreement. And then the final step is once all required documents are received, ODE reviews the supporting documentation and sends finalized completed match files to the sponsor with the CEP election spreadsheet. Sponsors return the CEP election spreadsheet, notifying ODE the intent to and how they will participate in CEP, such as a site, group, or district-wide. The Oregon Department of Education will send a copy of the final CEP documentation, which may include the state agency CEP agreement and additional grant agreements that must be signed by the superintendent or designee. The signed final document must be returned to the school nutrition mailbox within 5 business days of the receipt. To successfully submit the data collection, the ODE membership template must be used. The template can be found on the Special Provisions webpage along with step-by-step directions. The template column headings must not be altered in any way. Columns with highlighted headings populated with the requested data for each student. Blank cells in these columns will return errors from the DC matching system and will cause us to return your file for corrections. Please double check there is data in the correct format for every student in the required columns. Although not required for direct certification match, please provide all available data for the other fields and columns, as this increases the probability for matches and finding students eligible for extended benefits. Talk to your IT department or registration staff early to request the list and provide them with the link to the template. The information must be from the student information system. And we'll add some resources at the end of this presentation for you too. The populated membership template must be submitted electronically as an Excel sheet in the format of a .xlsx or a .csv format. You'll want to follow the naming convention requirement, and that is the district's name and then underscore district-wide membership for CEP. Create a zip file. Send the zip file via secure file transfer to the school nutrition mailbox address listed on the slide. Instructions on how to create a zip file and send via secure file transfer are on the step-by-step directions. The deadline to apply for CEP has been extended as Oregon has been granted a waiver. The extended deadline is now September 30th, 2022. We strongly encourage all interested sponsors to submit early to avoid any delay in CEP election and approval, and to along timely communication with families. The CEP annual survey is required in years 2, 3, and 4 of the current CEP agreement. This gives ODE visibility on sponsors who intend to go through the CEP election process or will continue with their current status. The April 15th and May 1st deadlines are ODE's outreach and publishing requirements for the USDA. However, they are essentially the same listings using the proxy data and will be posted at the same time by April 15th. Note, the proxy data is derived from the number of directly certified students, SNAP, TANF, and does not include students from other categorically eligible programs such as Migrant, McKinney-Vento, and Head Start. The CEP election documents are due by September 30th, 2022. Great. Now we're going to move on to community eligibility provisions and the operational considerations that you may want to take into account. CEP can simplify and streamline meal counting. The meal counting rules are 1 reimbursable meal per child per program. Sponsors must have a system in place to prevent duplicate meals. Another rule is meals must be counted at the point of service. And a clicker, tally sheet, paper, or an electronic roster may be used. Student eligibility for other programs. One of the benefits of CEP is the removal of the application processing burden for both families and schools. While this is great for nutrition services, it creates a challenge for local programs that support low-income students, such as reduction in athletic fees, student body fees, transportation, etc. To meet this need, schools may use a household income survey. There are many examples out on the web. We recommend that the survey not look like the confidential meal application. The household income survey is included in the application for the fee reductions. The income guidelines for the child nutrition program would be used to assess the survey for consistency. Funds from the nonprofit school food service account may not be used to pay for income survey processing for CEP schools. The nutrition staff, who typically make eligibility determination, may do the activity in this instance, but they must be paid from a different funding source. The costs may not be used to meet the National School Lunch Program matching requirement. A prototype of the income survey is available on the Special Provisions webpage. In this slide is a summary of how to use free and reduced data in other programs to demonstrate socioeconomic need. For programs requiring the percent free and reduced price eligible, the claiming percentage for free would be your ISP, your identified student percentage, times the multiplier 1.6. For Title I, you use U.S. Department of Education, and that would be DOE's guidance. For E-rate, use identified student count times the multiplier 1.6. The rate is valid for the same 4-year period as CEP. If the ISP is updated during the 4-year period, the new data would apply to E-rate the next funding year. And for the ADM, also the average daily membership reporting, all students attending a school participating in CEP are reported as economically disadvantaged. So in summary, we reviewed the community eligibility provision, including how to qualify for CEP, what an identified student percentage is, and how to strategically group schools to maximize benefits. We also reviewed the Oregon Community Eligibility Provision Incentive Reimbursement Program and how this program makes participation in CEP financially viable for most schools that qualify. And we reviewed the CEP election process and how to successfully collect and submit data. And then finally, we took a look at some areas of CEP operations. So if you have any questions, please use your chat feature to submit those questions. And we'll answer those questions in just one moment. So please take a few minutes, enter your questions, and then we'll be right back with you. And before we mute the line, I just want to let you know on the slide now, you'll see the full version of USDA's non-discrimination statement as of May 5th, 2022. And we'll go ahead and mute our line and wait for a few questions to come in.
Well, thank you, Michelle. This is John. I can answer, there's about 4 questions already on there. I'll just go answer them one by one.